Hello, and welcome to the AAMFT Podcast, your all-access pass to the latest news, developments, and thought leaders in the world of systemic therapy. We strive to relate, educate, and innovate, one episode at a time. I'm your host, Dr. Eli Karam, and we're brought to you by the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. Our podcast explores topics that relationship-based therapists care about. In addition to featuring unique conversations and interviews with established experts, our show provides information and education on direct practice and emerging trends in the MFT profession. For more information, please visit us at aamft.org. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. Today on the AAMFT Podcast, remembering the life and times of Karen Wampler. And when we originally interviewed Karen back in the fall of 2019, which would turn out to be her last interview that she would give, we were excited to tell you about the Handbook of Systemic Family Therapy. And that's what she'll be talking about today. But we lost Karen on January 2nd of this year while she was in Australia traveling with her husband Richard and her granddaughter. Let me tell you a little bit about MFT pioneer Karen Wampler. She served most recently as a professor and chaired the Department of Human Development and Family Studies at Michigan State. Prior to Michigan State, she was a professor of MFT, a department chair and a program director, and the Hutchinson's professor at Texas Tech. She was an assistant and associate professor at UGA, that's the University of Georgia, and during her tenure there, she developed the COAMFT accredited doctoral program. Dr. Wampler was also the founder and first coordinator of the interdisciplinary MFT for Certificate program at UGA, a collaboration with the university's MFT, social work, and counseling programs. She earned her bachelor's in sociology from Indiana University, a master's in sociology from the University of Pennsylvania, and a doctorate in MFT from Purdue University. And what she will be talking about with me today, including looking back at her longevity and career in the field of marriage and family therapy. Her last project, one which she speaks of great passion about. She served as the editor-in-chief of the Handbook of Systemic Family Therapy, a 4-volume work just getting ready to be released this week by Wiley. The Handbook, as I said, grew into 4 volumes consisting of 106 chapters and more than 2,700 pages written by 292 authors and co-authors, of which I'm proud to be one. She's an amazing contributor to the field, and here you have, in her own words, Dr. Karen Wampler. So pleased to be joined on the AAMFT Podcast today by someone that has kind of seen and done it all within the field of couple and family therapy. I'm talking about Dr. Karen Wampler. Karen, so good to have you. We're going to talk about the Handbook of Systemic Therapy later on, but first, I want to know your origin story. I want to know how you got interested in MFT and what initially attracted you to systemic thinking.
Well, Eli, thank you so much for having me. Yes, I started out, I was a sociology major because I liked a lot of things, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And people kept saying, what are you going to do with it? And I'd say, I had no idea. And they'd say, social work? I said, not a social worker. So I went and got my master's. I was ABD in sociology. And I was most interested in family sociology. And I then decided I wanted to finish a PhD in some kind of clinical area because it would fit better with having a family. Because Richard and I had just had our daughter Leah, and we were finishing up. But anyway, so Richard had a job at IU Purdue Fort Wayne, and we got a newsletter. I knew I didn't want clinical psychology because it was just like all individual. We got a newsletter from Purdue, and it talked about Wallace Denton talked about this new program called Marriage and Family Therapy. And it was just, from there, it was just absolutely perfect.
Give us a timeline here.
This was like I started in 1975, commuted from Fort Wayne to Lafayette. I'd spend, stay overnight and everything. And I came the same year as Doug Sprankle. So I had the advantage, too, of seeing the changes in the Purdue program, because Wallace Denton had kind of inherited it and moved it to in the day we called it home economics, child and family department. And Wallace, of course, was amazing. And Charles Figley was there at the time. And then Doug comes the same year I do. And I got to watch what he did in terms of literally, they had a child development center, and the clinic was going to be in what used to be the old child development center. Saw him clean out the closets so that we could do observation, and saw how he and Wallace and how Doug entered the system and how they worked out the curriculum and worked together. So it was just a very special time to be at Purdue and to be at the end, beginning of all that.
We will talk about Doug. You were his absolute first student, and I was one of his last, and Doug passed away in August of 2018 and is sorely missed. Interesting as well, when you think of Karen Wampler, the Wamplers as a duo, her husband Richard. What was Richard's background? Who found MFT first, you or him?
Me. And he was a physiological, he studied rats, brains in rats, did brain research on rats. I mean, eating, drinking, thirst, whatever. Got his PhD at University of Pennsylvania. And I was very much a stay-at-home wife with our kids and everything. And but eventually he got tired of teaching 4 sections of introductory psych a semester, and then got into more clinical work. And when I moved to Georgia, he followed me, gave up a tenured professor job, followed me to University of Georgia, and went to school in social work. And so he got his training. But luckily, he ended up with his internship at a family counseling center with MFTs, very strong MFTs in Georgia, very, as supervisor. So he got systemic thinking that way.
When you were coming of age in the profession, you said 1975 is really the golden age of family therapy, both clinically and from a research base. Who were the people you admired early on in your career?
Well, Doug was certainly one, and Charles Figley. Because we would still see like Whitaker, Mnuchin, all those people that were still there, the Gurneys, the relationship enrichment people. You could go to conferences and see them, so it was very exciting. And reading, Eli, what it's like to get that shift to thinking systems, and then you can't go back.
Oh, yeah. I always say once you think systemically, you can never think another way. And I always thought that way. I just didn't have the language till I was in an MFT program.
I can't say I always thought that way. But it was like family sociology had been my, major kind of thing as an undergraduate and a graduate. And I'd even done research in an honors thesis and so on, and my master's too. But it wasn't quite right, and so did the whole perspective, the process perspective and change perspective, and MFT had. I didn't get systemic thinking till then. Yeah.
Yeah, but you surely got it. And one of the things when we talk about Doug, you and Doug have many similarities in the sense that because you were such a purveyor of the field, you were never really associated with any model or specific discipline. You really got to see how the field evolved. So I'm wondering, from where we were in 1975 to where we are now in 2020, what are the biggest changes do you think in the field? And we'll talk in 2 levels, kind of clinically and from a research base.
So when I came, I had a very strong research background because I was trained in sociology. And for that, I've been very grateful. And in the early days, we didn't get much research training in our education programs. And I've seen that strengthen tremendously over the years in terms of how sophisticated people are. And I love seeing our field, I really think, is unique as it's developed. And that when we have training for our own training programs, instead of just borrowing from other disciplines, the commitment people have to research and clinical work and the integration of the two. I do not see the separation. Clinicians, I've given many research-based presentations at AAMFT. They are excited about it. They want it. They are hungry for it. They want to think about it. I have found most MFTs to be quite analytical, and part of that is just thinking systems and being able to go at different levels, and it fits perfectly. And the kind of research I think we need is close to the ground observational research. As you know, I've always promoted that kind of aspect. We know as clinicians that how people talk about what they do develops a lot over therapy, and a lot of what we're doing is helping them change or think through, and new narratives develop. And we work a lot, and we help them work a lot with what they look like, what people look like, their nonverbals, like John Gottman, studied for so long. So I think that's a unique aspect of MFT that is underappreciated, how we as clinicians go into every single session as a researcher.
When you think of also training, you've been affiliated with University of Georgia, Texas Tech, Michigan State, where you retired a couple of years ago. You're the busiest person in retirement I know, by the way. But you've been fundamental in training the next generation of MFT educators and researchers in these doctoral programs. Where do you think we are as a state as far as doctoral education from where you started, and what do we need to do to make sure we are training the next crop of MFTs that are going to go on to do original research versus farming it out to other disciplines? I mean, because I feel like the idea to do the work, clinical work, will always be there. Master's programs are healthy, but I have little worry about doctoral programs in the future and producing quality scholars that are going to go out and follow in your footsteps, follow in Doug Sprinkle's footsteps. What are your thoughts on that?
We have a very, very demanding training model, and I think it's a thing that absolutely makes our discipline different. And the trouble is, it's a very expensive training model. It's very expensive in terms of faculty time, faculty investment, and student investment, and so it's hard from the beginning to keep a balance between the clinical work and the research work. And I think that, as I said, I found MFTs to really there's not an inconsistency between research and clinical work, and I've seen them integrate the work. They don't know so much that they're integrating it, but they are researchers. The problem is, I love our training model. I think it makes all the difference that we have people behind the mirror, that we have video, that we have feedback. We're collegial from the beginning. There's no way to hide out in an MFT training program. Faculty, too, you can't hide out because you have to be, it's clear from the beginning that the faculty have clay feet in terms of clinical work, and that we all have our struggles with it and we all have successes and so on. So the tension is, and I haven't figured this out, Eli, the tension is I feel strongly about our training model. I think and especially the cohort model, both on research and clinical side. The trouble is it's extremely expensive, and it's extremely difficult to explain to administrators why we have to have it this way.
Yeah, I feel the same way, because a lot of MFT programs are housed within, human development, child studies, family studies, and they don't have clinical components. So to describe to the stakeholders why what we do is so important, and you're speaking to the choir, you cannot separate the clinical and the research. I don't know about you, but everything I've wanted to study came out of my direct interaction with clients in a therapy room, which is beautiful, but not everybody thinks that way.
That's right. And so what happens is when we get it, when we publish and when we get grants, and the reason we're getting the publications and the grants, especially the grants and the grant-funded research, is because we have that combination of observation close to the ground, finding new things. It's like astronomy in terms of we have to observe, and then write. And we also need to do it in teams in order to make it work. The problem is the clinical work is so demanding on faculty and students in any kind of program, doctoral or master's, that it's a crisis. It's always on the front burner. You can't exactly say that I've got a client that needs to go into treatment and say, well, I'm not going to work on this for another week. And so the research part gets puts on the back burner. So it's very difficult to balance.
I mean, I have my one foot in advocacy and working the national level with AAMFT, and I'm a full professor now, and I feel this dialectic tension. You were someone who's been an incredibly productive scholar, administrator. How did you find that balance over the years, and what tips? Because we'll have a lot of academic MFTs listen to this podcast as well as practitioners. How did you find that balance over the years of staying true to all those different areas?
On accident. I wish I were like Fred Piercy and, write every day and organize and everything like that. It was more always for me caring so much about the questions, caring so much about the problems, and then it helps to focus yourself and write grants, because you really have to explain why you think what you do and make a case for it. And then when you get a grant, that kind of makes everything on the front burner that way. But I can't say exactly how I did it. Working with graduate students, having the privilege of working with amazing students, both master's and PhD students, that always motivated me, and I know it motivates most MFT faculty. And it's not like using the student to do research, it's doing research with the student in a collegial manner. Sometimes, yes, it's your own project that you're leading. Other times, it's the student's project and they're in the lead. So that makes a big difference. But how I did it in terms of time, I'm not that organized about it.
We've had Fred on the show, and he is very disciplined in how he does it, and that works for him. But I'm more like you. Different things take priorities at different times. But I do think you're also tapping into what has made it, your career so special. It is these collaborations you've had, much like you had with Doug. Doug gives you credit. He would not have known what Common Factors was. You introduced him to that, and much like you took that on to the countless students we could list a who's who of people in the field now that Karen has worked with and trained and mentored. I'm also curious, the name of it is escaping me, but you and Adrian and your husband Richard wrote this pretty influential paper for JMFT recently about the state of the field and where we're going. Tell me what it was to your experience of kind of writing that and kind of the main points of that article for some of our listeners that have not read that. And if you haven't, if you're not a journal reader, it really contextualizes a lot of where we're at and where we need to go as a field.
Yes, that JMFT article was important. And then I also wrote Chapter 1 of Volume 1 of the Handbook with Joellen Patterson, and that kind of expands on some of the ideas. We as a field have not told our own story. And I do feel that we've taken as a field, especially on the research side, a more victim stance where we're trying to prove that we are worthy instead of that we belong at the table, instead of appreciating and talking with each other about what we know and what we do. We tell each other the stories, and the people are doing incredible work, but we haven't told the story because we're trying to fit into a psychology model that does not work for us. So for me, it's like telling the story. That was what that article was about, and it's also about what Chapter 1 is about. And then to have opportunities to talk with each other, which is just, as you know, a delight. You get around other systems thinkers, it's incredible.
Oh, relational people. That's what
relational people, you know each other, and you just find such a relief to doing it. And to tell the story and then to wrestle actually face-to-face or email to email or Skype to, or, WhatsApp or whatever, wrestle with some of the issues that we haven't dealt with. Like, for example, the definition of family. And the fact that we haven't talked enough about it, we don't have a clear narrative as a field, then we can't explain it to anybody else. A physician never has to explain why he or she sees individuals. Now, they may need to explain why they don't see families, but we've never explained as family therapists that we see individuals, couples, we see all kind of constellations, and that's the point. We are flexible. That's our gift. We don't articulate that.
As Mary Bowen said, you could be a family therapist with one person in the room. It's all about the way of thinking. But you're pointing out something huge and critical that we do a great job with. I've never met an MFT. No one on this podcast has ever, I use the word passionate with every guest, but it's true. People love talking about systems. But we have done a poor job compared to the other mental health disciplines of telling the world what we do.
That's right.
Still, yes.
And so we don't explain that we're not a modality. And of course, that got emphasized because in psychiatry, which is a very established profession, psychology, what's unique there about family therapy is that you see people together. That's not what's unique about systemic family therapy. And if you look at the keynote speaker on earlier this week, the first keynote speaker who talked about her own therapy, she was talking about relational therapy, but she went by herself. Nobody in that room, in the plenary, all those hundreds of people in that room, had any doubt that that was systemic family therapy. And yet we have not explained that. And so there's the issue about, what we do, that we're not a modality. It's not who's in the room that's important. We don't explain our definition of family. People will say, well, I don't have a family. Well, everybody has a family, but we go with how people define their own family. I've had several mothers in my time. Only one of them was biological. You know what I'm saying, Eli?
Fictive kin, yes.
And then the other piece we haven't gotten together and talked through, even though we're totally capable of this, is the political ramifications of the word family. Because family has, it's a conservative, liberal kind of gets into the political aspects, and we need to talk through how we have a narrative around that and how we navigate that. And we have major social justice political issues within the field that we deal with pretty well, actually, but we haven't talked about how we deal with them. Because there's a range, and we hit it in training. We hit it with how we deal with clients. I remember one of my very first clients turned to me and she said, it was really, everything was going really well. She turned to me and she said, Karen, are you a Christian? And I was new in my training, and I just froze. And I thought, and I said, no, I'm not a Christian. I'm an atheist, and which I was at the time. And she thought, and she stopped, and she looked, and then she said, God can work through anybody. And we have those, with every client that walks in the room, we have cultural, social issues. We have them with each other, and we have them with payers, insurers, everything else with the outside world. We have the ability to talk about those and how we handle them systemic. And so I'm so excited that we have the stories. You talk to any MFT. And then the research we define in research, if it's a family research thing, we're again going back to defining sessions as when there's more than one person in the room. That's not how we do it. So we've not defined what in the olden days, I call it independent variable. We haven't defined properly what we are actually doing, and we are capable of that. The new people coming up are absolutely incredible in terms of their training, the kind of work they do, the breadth, and their connections with other fields, because you have to connect with people in epidemiology and physiology and everything, and they're doing that. They're also doing international work. And Eli, you and I have had the experience every time of people coming back, they're on research teams, and the team, usually psychiatrists, psychologists, maybe a social worker or two, will say, oh my gosh, we need you. We need somebody like you that has that family systems perspective. Again, it's a narrative. And if we're not going to figure it out without talking to each other about it. And so what frustrates me about the field is that we have not, these conferences need to be about talking with each other. They do not need to be about us sitting in the seat and listening. It's just, we can have some of that, but we need, and the work that people are doing is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, you know it.
And people still love seeing the work. I mean, again, you're preaching to the choir. I think when you want to come to a conference, you want to see the work being done. You want to be able to talk about it. It is the throwback to the excitement. And when you entered the field into the 70s, into, my career is now 20 years into my career that I remember reading about it. And that is something that we can still do. So it's sharing our excitement. It is, as you said so eloquently, it's collaborating with the other people. And that's the only way I know to get other people to know what we do, is to show our work and collaborate and let people know about it, which is kind of the origin of this handbook of systemic family therapy. So it's a beautiful segue into the goals of that. So tell us, again, you've been retired for a few years, but you are still passionate and active in every part of MFT and AAMFT. So talk about the origin of the project, and it's really become something that I think is going to be big for AAMFT training programs. I think it is going to be what we use as that currency to communicate with other professions. It's a substantial project. So tell us how that even came to be, Karen.
It came to be because Tracy Todd he knew for a long time that we needed something like a handbook or some kind of major resource. And he had been in conversation with people at Wiley Publishing, and they together came up with the idea of a handbook, that would be an important thing to help define the field, help establish that narrative of what we are. And then Tracy contacted me to ask if I would take this on. And we negotiated a bit because I knew it needed to have a major academic publisher. It could not be published in-house at this point. It maybe in 10 years could be published in-house, but it needed to be published by a major academic publisher. I pushed for Wiley, yes. And then the handbook developed out of I first went and looked at, looked again at all the other handbooks and all the other resources out there. There's just nothing out there at all that represents what we do. It still is the old chapter on each theory, and then each model, evidence-based model, separately. We don't work that way. We don't think that way. We take those things and integrate them. There's a place for the pure models. We use those too, but it's that next step. So I wanted some kind of platform and give authors a chance to have an authoritative voice to teach us what is known about their topic and what we need to know, what we know, what we kind of know, and what we need to find out, and how best to think about that. And so that was it. And the project, we were systems people, very collaborative. So my first step was to have a small meeting that AAMFT funded in Alexandria, and we sat there with notes and pieces of paper and everything else, and not, the electronic chalkboard. It's not a chalkboard. Working out what the table of contents, very technical. Shari Alarti had to help and really draw out what we thought the table of contents was going to be. And it was the most fun conversation. Liz Wheeling, Pauline Boss, Rick Miller, Adrian Blow. What's not to like? And then
you have a great collection of associate editors. So in that initial conversation, did you view that as multiple volumes from the start, or did it morph into that once you start getting all those people together and putting all those ideas on?
No, I totally, my own self, I totally pictured one volume. Are you kidding me? And then at the end of that April meeting, that was so important, okay, 2 volumes, I can see that. And then it clearly evolved. And so the next step was finding the editors. And then it was a kind of a combination of developing what the nature, the content of the 4 volumes and the structure, as well as editors. And it evolved. Every single person, Eli, that I asked to be an editor said yes. And they said yes because they knew the project was needed. They absolutely knew it. And it was a very collaborative effort when putting the table of contents together. It evolved. It was so exciting. It was all of us thinking and talking like my dream of a field that's what we need to do a whole lot more of. And I'm hoping that the handbook is going to give an impetus for that. It's not a resource of okay, this is it. We're done. This is I see it as a platform for learning, discussion, for researchers, for clinicians, for educators, for policymakers. Like, okay, so we've got this piece. Where do we go next? Like they do, again, I love astronomy. We had so much of this about the moon launch and all. They talk to each other. They share data. They puzzle. They explain where they don't know and everything. And they have some clear outcomes that they're looking at. We need to have those conversations in that model. The trouble is, I'm going to skip back to something else, funding. Because as an administrator, how do you protect faculty time? Because the faculty don't want to give up supervision. They don't want to give up the clinical work, and they don't want to give up teaching. And yet they have to give up something in order to do the research. And if you separate out the researcher from the clinical work, the MFT faculty are not happy. And so as an administrator, though, you can make a strong case for the very strong doctoral students and master's students that we have, the numbers of students, and the impact, the community-based impact of these people, and that you can always engage alumni, and which we've not done well enough, alumni to tell the stories of what they are on the bottom they are at the street level. They are doing the work, and the work is compelling. And when you tell those stories, policymakers listen. Like Bill Doherty, what he's doing. So many of us too. Anyway, so going back to the book, the same thing happened, Eli, with authors. Because who needs to write another chapter? The people we were talking to had lots of publications, they had chapters, but all of them knew, every one of them. I don't think, maybe 2 people out of all people we contacted turned us down.
Well, I said yes right away.
Yeah, because we know the resources needed, the whole project is needed, a handbook, and also that the story hasn't been told in the way it needs to be told. And so that was so affirming. And when I would talk to people on the phone, I would say things like, when did you get the idea of systems? Or what was it like to see your first client? And we all have those amazing common experiences. And then, and then talk about their work. So that was the hard part, Eli. It was very interesting in getting people, when the editors and I were working with authors, is to be willing to take an authoritative stance and to say in writing what they know, what they kind of know, and what they don't know, and encourage that. It's almost like a teaching approach. Explain, not teaching one down, but explaining, and then being open and transparent.
Yeah, the format, you're speaking to the format of each entry or each chapter, and I do think it positions for, like what you said, to talk about where we were, tell those stories, and where we need to go and what we don't know. So I am curious, now that it is done and out, obviously this was, you've had the experience and been a very successful editor of our gold standard journal, JMFT, the Journal of Marital and Family Therapy. Compare that experience to this experience of being the editor of the handbook.
I really enjoy it. And I have to tell you, the agony for me was having to write my own chapter in this handbook. And I thought, at one point I called Joellen and I said, Joellen, don't you just want to write this chapter by yourself? Karen, you are kidding me. You are not going to get out of this. But anyway, I really, really like the editing piece. The difference is, I liked it in JMFT as well as obviously the handbook. The difference is in the handbook to give people the freedom to write what they know. And you're going to find that the chapters are different. Some of them are like the volume 1 is on the profession, and we have a chapter on ethics and the future of the field, and Fred Piercy wrote a beautiful, and then the history of the field and so on. But you're going to find, we couldn't have a rigid structure for the chapters. Like if you look at Gurman and Kniskern, in the Gurman couple handbook, which is fabulous, but he had a whole set of questions and you had to follow in order. The topics are so different. Like, for example, we have a chapter by Tina Tim on affairs, and it's about specifically about affairs, working with people who've had an affair, and they believe they want to continue and heal the relationship. Well, you're not going to find a randomized controlled trial on that, right? But then you have another, chapter like Alan Carr about the effectiveness of systemic family therapy. So there's just such a range. And I have to tell you, having the privilege of reading every one of the chapters, over 100 chapters, you're going to like reading them.
And when you say you, of course, someone.
I mean, all of you.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I really think is revolutionary about this project, right? This is going to be read by MFT students. This is going to be read by researchers. It's going to be read by people in other disciplines, again, starting the dialogue of what MFT is all about. The other thing you were able to do is unite, as you were referencing to, most of the luminaries in our field that are still living with new and emerging leaders in our field. So that I love that, and I love to see the table of context, not just of those associate editors you have, but of the authors. And again, this is one of the most projects I've been most proud to be part of. But I do think it will set us forward as a field. And I mean, I'd like to see this in every training program.
For me, it's a platform for jumping off. And when you read a good handbook, like the Handbook of Psychotherapy and Behavior Change, I mean, that's a high goal. That's a gold standard for me in terms of a researcher on the research side. But it's a platform for making you think, and it's also a resource for what's already out there and directions to go and how to think about everything. So, I think educators, students, researchers, and policymakers. And there'll be some people who want to, read most of it. Other people will just pick and choose because it's organized by topic. If you look at other handbooks, they're not organized by topic.
You were referencing this. Tell us again the 4 volumes, the scope of each volume.
And I'd have to admit, I was not happy with thinking about 4 volumes, but it just became so clear. So the first volume is on the profession. The second volume is on parenting, children and adolescents. And our field has almost completely ignored the child and adolescent literature.
Which is funny because because most of our identified patients, where we expand the system, start as a child or adolescent level and move from there. It is ironic, kind of paradoxical.
Well, I don't think it is paradoxical. It is ironic, but you can see why it happened. Because, again, we got stuck in thinking we were a modality, seeing people together. And a lot of times with parent-child, the evidence-based programs are just the parent alone comes in. Well, we're systems thinkers. In reality, that doesn't bother us a bit, right? And then, but you talk to somebody like Ruben Parra, who uses an evidence-based program, PMTO, Parent Management Training Oregon, and does research on that. Yes, it's parenting, but when somebody's stuck, when they're coming to the groups and they're stuck, what do? They see the mom and dad together. They see the mom together. They might see the child alone or something like that. They problem solve, and then they go back to the standard protocol. That's how we think, how we work. And that's what we wish all of our caregivers, I wish my physician worked that way, The flexibility to see different people and the flexibility to think through problems with people, not imposing some pre-existing structure. So going back, so here we have a whole volume on child and adolescent, right? If you look at the other handbooks, existing handbooks, it's not there. It is not there. In fact, I think Recent Family Process was the first one where I even saw Marian Forgatch and Jerry Patterson's work. It was amazing to me. The third volume is the couple volume. The fourth one is very innovative. It's on global health. And how we started to get the table of contents with that was to look at the United Nations data on the most severe problems, mental illness, the most severe problems, mental and physical, across all the countries in the world. And, chose the one and then followed up with people. And we find people, authors in our field, systemic family therapists who are clinicians, every author in those 4 volumes, they are clinicians.
Yeah.
And they are researchers, and it shows.
And I love that about it. And I think most of them have LMFT after their name.
That's right. Most of them have LMFT, and many of the ones that don't, who are in Europe, where they don't have that designation, even though they are completely compatible with us.
What I love about this project, I mentioned a couple minutes ago about MFT historically farming out their work. There's nothing farmed out here.
There's nothing farmed out, no. And then, so Volume 4 was the most challenging because it has a more global focus, and also looking at the family as a unit in terms of especially getting the intergenerational piece in there. And again, you see why in the standard psychology handbooks it's so difficult to get into that, because it's hard to do an evidence-based trial when you think about how we think about multi-generational work. And you think about trauma, refugees, it's multi-generational. You know, of course, we all think multi-generationally, right? Whether we're Bohemian, behavioral, whatever.
Sure, it's our blueprint. We only know
it's
the
our
relationship
blueprint.
of the one we're in and the one
Exactly.
we came from, of course.
So that volume, I mean, when I see authors, I say, just wait till you read the other chapters.
You're smiling about that.
I am smiling.
That's the one that I am most excited to read, because it's the stuff that is probably the most innovative and future thinking as far as what's going on globally and how we fit into that. But I think that's huge. That's its own volume.
And people, you're not going to, I mean, it is incredible what the work that people are doing. And when I say us as a field, do not know that. And these are the people.
We don't talk to each other.
We don't talk to each other, and they are not the people presenting at, I mean, somehow it needs to be more, we need more opportunities to focus on this at our conferences.
I know, wouldn't it be cool if we could do a whole conference around what you're talking about? And I don't think, I mean, someone like me who is an advocate for profession, because like you, I mean, this is where I hang my shingle. I have no other discipline, professional affiliation to attach with, and I am for whatever will keep this as a standalone, vital profession. So this is a huge thing, and you and I have that similar passion. So as we get ready to wrap up here, this is, you know, you've shared a lot, and I again can't wait to read this and digest this. When you think, and this is, you're humble, but this is more of a legacy question than I have asked over the last year in the podcast. I mean, been associated with all these great innovations and training and research. How do you want to be remembered in the field, Karen?
As a good mentor. Yeah, as a good mentor. That's been the most important thing for me. And in a way, with clients, you're mentoring clients. With supervision, you're mentoring. With editing, you're mentoring. But especially as mentoring students, and the privilege of mentoring master's and doctoral students, it is just, well, it's just such a gift. And then we get to keep contact with people and see what happens next. And with clients, we have the same, we get to see growth. We get to see change. We get to see, we're also up front in a lot of pain and a lot of, despair. And, but we have ways and means and competence and experience in how to help people through those things. And we make wonderful mentors in our field. I mean, there's no question to me, because we work systemically. Going back to the administrative part, that's another part of mentoring. And that's a way of, because we're systems thinkers, I mean, you'll see that many of us have gone into administration and departments. There are a lot of departments with MFT, department chairs and so on. But in terms of protecting faculty time and helping out with the research part, it's a systemic, problem-solving, collaborative, trading off, negotiating with your colleagues, negotiating with the department chair, and the department chair, if you have a strong narrative, the chair can get resources, and the administration, and that's again another reason why we need narrative, strong narratives. The biggest motivator for me doing the handbook was that in 1975, when I started my graduate program, nobody knew what an MFT was. And now I get the same question. They'll say, what are you? And I say, I'm a marriage and family therapist, or now I say systemic family therapist. And they'll say, are you a psychologist? So that's our responsibility. It's nobody else's responsibility, right? Family physicians don't have to explain. They only see individuals, when in the olden days they used to see. And we're the opposite of that. We're going the right direction. And the other piece is, we have not taken on really the narrative and telling the story about how the family as a unit, broadly defined, is absolutely precious and basic to everything. And we know inherently that's true. Everybody's going crazy about the children at the borders being separated because we know what that means. And I say we, I mean every human being knows what that means. Well, maybe almost everybody. But we haven't made the case about family. And the psychologists, bless their hearts, are having to deal with the brain because now they've reduced it from the individual to the brain of the individual, or genetics or whatever. And so we have to make the case, and it's a messy case, about the importance of family, no matter what.
Yes, I mean, I couldn't say it any better than that, and I'm not even going to try. Thank you so much for being with us today. The Handbook of Systemic Family Therapy is out now. Go and get it. It's from Wiley, and it is going to be very influential, as you've heard this hour, in moving the field forward and facilitating this very important dialogue that you and I are having today, and that I hope we can keep going out and doing and making sure this profession that we love so very much will be around for the long haul. Thank you very much, Karen Wampler.
Thank you, Eli.
Eli back with you. So concludes another installment of the AAMFT Podcast. I was so happy to be able to conduct the last interview with Karen Wampler. Little did we know that day when I sat down with her in Austin, Texas, that would be her last major interview that she'd give. She was a little nervous about doing a podcast, but her passion and for the field, and certainly you can tell how excited she was about what would turn out to be her last contribution, the 4-volume Handbook of Systemic Family Therapy, getting ready to be released by Wiley. And you can go to wiley.com and just type in Handbook of Systemic Family Therapy. With Karen at the helm, this is a who's who as far as authors and even editors, associate editors, including Rick Miller, Ryan Siegel, I'll tell you more about in a second, Lenore McQuay, my friend and colleague Adrian Blow, Mudita Rastogi, and Renee Singh. Like I said, the handbook is the first of its kind, organizing material by presenting issue rather than intervention, integrating the latest scholarly literature on systemic interventions focused on children, couples, and family. You'll definitely want to go and check that out. I thought I'd leave you with a few words from someone who Karen impacted greatly, a former student and colleague, Dr. Ryan Siegel. Ryan says, "I always loved to have Karen read and edit my papers. She had such a way of thinking about our field that was both broad and deep. Karen used her clarity of thought and vision for the field as the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Marital and Family Therapy from 2001 through 2005. During her tenure as editor, she facilitated many important conversations with the field while also advancing the scope and research of the journal. More recently, she served as the editor-in-chief of the Handbook of Systemic Family Therapy, the 4-volume work in preparation by Wiley. I remember talking with her when she was deciding whether to undertake the project. She had a lofty vision of what the handbook could become and what it could do for the field. I never doubted for 1 second that AAMFT had chosen the right person to spearhead the publication. Personally, I'm saddened by the passing of an incredible mentor and friend. It goes without saying that I was not ready to lose Karen, none of us were, and her incredible support and strength in my life. For as connected as she was to my professional life, following it and giving it a much-needed perspective and advice, she was just as connected to my personal life. She knew each of us and each of my children by name and regularly asked how they were doing. She always made sure to ask about my wife and made sure to send her regards. I will miss those conversations. Call it her attachment training or simply who she was, but Karen had a unique ability to make every single person with whom she interacted feel special, like the most important person in the world. I remember always feeling that with her and thinking how lucky I was. Then I would see her at social functions off to the side with a different person and overhear her talking just as sincerely and thoughtfully to them. She had the knack to connect with people. For the past couple years, I had wanted to give Karen a plaque that said, "People may forget what you say and do, but they will never forget how you make them feel." To me, that represents Karen Wampler's life and what she means to me and so many of us. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote, "Lives of great men and women all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing, leave behind the footprints on the sands of time. What incredible footprints Karen has left for all of us to walk in. Thank you, Karen. And thank you, Brian Siegel. Please drop us a line. You can reach me at info@elikaram.com. ELIKARAM.com. Follow us on Twitter. AMFT's tag is @the-AMFT. Mine is @Dr. Eli Live. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, my friends. So long, Karen, and stay systemic.